It started with a single whisper, not from a palace guard or some scandal-hungry reporter. It came from a servant, a man named Edward. Not many knew his name, but everyone in Buckingham Palace knew his face. For over 30 years, Edward had drifted through the grand halls like a ghost in uniform, always silent, always present. He'd seen monarchs come and go, scandals rise and fall, but this time, this one hit different, because it wasn't just about misplaced funds or a noble's reckless affair. It was about the queen and the money. See, Camilla had always known how to work a room. Every charity gala, every royal event, she moved with precision. Handshakes, soft smiles, carefully crafted charm. But Edward had been watching, and lately, that charm looked like a mask stretched too tight. She smiled, yes, but her eyes, they darted. Her exits grew swifter, her phone calls longer and quieter. And at one gala, Edward saw it. She stepped out early, clutching her phone like it held the fate of the entire monarchy. He followed her, not out of nosiness, but instinct. The kind of instinct you develop when you've spent decades watching people pretend. She stood in the garden, back to the fountain, murmuring in urgent tone, "Transfer it, no delays, and no one must find out." Those words alone didn't mean much unless you knew what to listen for, and Edward did. That tone, that pressure, that wasn't some PR emergency or a misplaced invoice. This was fear, the kind of fear you only feel when you're hiding something massive. But Edward didn't say a word, not yet. He went back inside, back to polishing glasses and arranging chairs like nothing had happened, but his mind racing. The next few days, he stayed alert. He noticed King Charles growing colder, more distant, Camilla skipping meetings, the Royal Trust's ledgers suddenly being locked away when they were usually open for routine checks. Something was unraveling behind the velvet curtains. Edward could feel it. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the palace turned quiet. Staff moved slower, fireplaces crackled louder. Edward was tasked with tidying King Charles's private study, a job he'd done 1,000 times. But that day, something drew him toward the corner near the fireplace. An old oak box, half covered in dust. Most would have ignored it, but Edward, driven by that gut feeling, opened it. Inside, paper, lots of it, old documents yellowed with age. At first, it looked like standard royal clutter until he saw the heading, The Royal Trust. His pulse quickened. He flipped through the pages. Numbers, transfers, names, dates going back 20 years, vague categories like charitable outreach and diplomatic discretion. But the figures didn't lie. Millions had vanished, slipped quietly into accounts that didn't officially exist. Edward's hands trembled because there, at the bottom of several pages, was Camilla's signature. Clear as day, not once, not twice, but dozens of times over the years. And it wasn't just petty expenses or odd donations. This was systematic, organized, hidden behind layers of noble language and polished reports. Now, Edward had a choice. Say nothing and protect the woman he'd served, or do something unthinkable, confront the king himself. He waited, he watched, he gathered more. Every whisper from staff, every odd glance Camilla gave him. Every document she left a little too exposed in her study. The picture was becoming clear and terrifying. This wasn't just Camilla moving money around, this was a long-running machine, one that had pumped cash into hidden corners of society. Politics, influence, maybe worse. And the worst part? King Charles had no idea. Edward stood before King Charles with a weight in his chest he hadn't felt since his first week in the palace. This wasn't about broken china or missed duties, this was something deeper, a betrayal buried in the ledgers of royalty. Charles sat in his private study, sunlight spilling across the mahogany desk, unaware that the next few minutes would change everything. Edward's voice trembled slightly as he spoke. He didn't lead with accusations, instead he explained what he'd found, the old dossier, the signatures, the patterns in the transactions. He placed the documents carefully on the desk as if they might explode. For a moment, Charles didn't respond. He stared at the papers, unmoving. Then slowly, his hand reached for them. His eye skimmed the numbers, the signatures, his wife's name over and over again. At first, Charles shook his head. No, he whispered, she wouldn't, but the numbers kept speaking. They didn't care about love, about marriage, about the image they had both worked so hard to protect. Charles's face tightened. The disbelief gave way to a darker realization, a a storm began to brew behind his eyes. Not rage, but something colder. The kind of anger that doesn't yell but burns slow and deep. Edward stood still, waiting for the verdict, not on Camilla, but on himself. Would the king see this as treason? Would he be cast out for revealing the cracks in the crown? But Charles only nodded once. Then again, slower. His voice was distant when he finally spoke. "You were right to bring this to me." What followed was a quiet war. The palace didn't erupt in chaos. There were no royal declarations or public drama. Not yet. Instead, Charles began a private investigation, using Edward as his eyes and ears. The king reviewed decades of financial documents in solitude, his face lined with exhaustion. Every discovery added another nail to the coffin of trust he had built with Camilla. Edward returned to the archives, determined to find more. He searched every drawer, every crevice for anything Camilla might have missed, and he found it. A forgotten notebook tucked behind a shelf of outdated ledgers. Its leather spine was cracked, its pages marked with familiar handwriting. Camilla's dates, figures, mentions of ministers, media outlets, donations, but the word that caught Edward's attention was one he hadn't seen before: leverage. The notebook detailed how the slush fund had been used, not just hidden, but weaponized. It funded favors, smoothed over inconvenient scandals, bought loyalty. This wasn't just financial corruption, it was political manipulation. Quiet, careful, and devastatingly effective. Edward brought the notebook to Charles, who read it in silence. His expression didn't change, but something in him shifted. His shoulders straightened, his eyes sharpened. He had entered the fight not as a husband, but as a king. And then Camilla walked in. She entered the study without warning, her face pale but defiant. Her eyes darted to the documents on the desk, to Edward, then back to Charles. She knew. "You're spying on me?" she asked, her voice low and trembling. "After everything we've been through?" Charles didn't answer. He simply gestured to the notebook. Camilla moved closer, saw the pages, and froze. Her breath hitched. She looked at Charles again, searching, pleading, but his expression was made of stone. The silence between them was unbearable. And then, in a whisper, she confessed. Not all of it, but enough. Camilla's voice cracked as she admitted the truth. She hadn't meant for it to go that far, she said. It started with a single favor, a quiet transfer to help a friend in Parliament secure re-election. Then a donation to silence a reporter sniffing around royal expenditures. It was always for the monarchy, she claimed, to protect its image, to keep the crown untouchable, but over time the lines blurred. The money kept moving, the secrecy deepened, and eventually she stopped asking herself if it was right. She only asked if it would work. Charles listened without a word, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on hers. But not once did he interrupt. And when she finally finished, breathless, teary, defeated, he looked at her like she was a stranger. He didn't yell, he didn't weep. He simply said, "You've disgraced the institution you swore to uphold." That night, the palace held its breath. The next morning, Charles called a private council meeting. Edward stood quietly at the edge of the room, the same man who once polished silverware, now carrying the fate of a queen in his hands. Charles presented the documents. The ledger, the notebook, the old emails Edward had uncovered, every shred of proof laid out for the most senior advisors in the monarchy to see. The room fell silent as the truth took hold. Murmurs of disbelief gave way to grim acceptance. Then came the final decision. Stripped of all royal titles, banished from Buckingham Palace, under investigation pending formal legal action, Camilla was no longer queen. The announcement wasn't made with pomp or pageantry. No televised address, no press conference, just a line in the royal bulletin and a photograph of the palace gates closed tight. But the world erupted. Headlines exploded across newspapers, online forums, and talk shows. Queen Camila Otto's secret financial plot. Royal trust scandal, £500 million missing. Monarchy in crisis. The backlash was immediate. Citizens once indifferent to royal drama were outraged. Protesters gathered outside palace walls. Parliament called for full financial transparency. The monarchy had faced controversy before, but this was betrayal from within. Camilla, now confined to a remote estate, became a ghost. No interviews, no public appearances, just silence. Her attempts to spin the story, to blame Edward, fell flat. The public didn't believe her. Her allies vanished. Those she had bought with secret funds turned their backs, afraid of being dragged down with her. She had lost everything: power, respect, love, all for a secret that couldn't stay buried. Edward, for his part, refused the spotlight, but Charles wouldn't let his loyalty go unrecognized. At a quiet ceremony, the king honored him with a rare royal distinction and a private pension that would allow him to live comfortably for the rest of his days. Edward accepted with a bowed head and tired eyes. He didn't want praise. He wanted peace. And Charles? He changed. The betrayal hardened him, but it also sharpened him. He implemented sweeping reforms within the royal trust: independent audits, public disclosures, a transparency charter enforced across all departments. The monarchy, under his lead, transformed from an old institution wrapped in tradition to a modern entity built on accountability. Still, the scars lingered. Charles would walk the halls Camilla once ruled and feel her absence like a phantom pain. Edward would stand by the windows some evenings and wonder if loyalty ever came without a cost. And Camilla, exiled and forgotten, would sit in her quiet estate watching news reports about a palace she once commanded, now rebuilt without her. The crown endured, but it would never shine quite the same again.